So anyway, I wanted to welcome all of you. I'm really excited today. We've got a great event, which is with women who know a lot about power. We all know that, God, that's been the conversation this year, hasn't it? Is why do we have none of it and why do those guys have all of it? And I think the most interesting thing, and the reason why I put this thing together, was Beth Gillette and I were talking at lunch, and this is what her practice is about. She counsels women and she, coaches them. And I said to her, I said, what is the biggest issue that women ask you? And she said, they want to know about power and how they're holding on to it, how they wield it. And then she said something that I thought was really remarkable. She said, the most important thing is that the question is, are they giving it away accidentally? And I thought, wow, that's like really, really incredible, because I'd never heard anybody say that before. And of course, I wonder if that's one of the issues we have, is that we give it away. We don't realize we're giving it away. And so anyway, I am so delighted to have, all right, Jessica, you okay?
Yes.
So anyway, so here are our two panelists, and what we'll do is I have a bunch of questions for them, and I will ask them some questions as we go along. If you can also type in a question if you want to, or you can, there's a little, should be a little thing to raise your hand. That sometimes is on the phone. I'm not quite sure if it's on the computer panel, but you can type it in if you have a question while we're going along, and we'll do a quick talk for about 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and then I'll open the floor and you guys can ask all the questions you want of these wonderful ladies and of each other. And so let me introduce our two panelists. There's Beth Gillette. She's a PhD managing partner of Contemporary Leadership Advisors. And then she brought in the wonderful Jessica Dawson, who's PhD, US Army veteran, which I think is really an amazing title to have, especially today when we're looking for women who've really done everything a guy's done, who is presented at Duke, the Kenan Institute for Ethics, and the United States Military Academy at West Point, and the Association of the United States Army. I mean, I do a lot of stuff and I feel like I'm pretty powerful, but I don't think I could get in, I wouldn't be able to get up there and present to those people. So the big question is for these ladies, why do women still struggle in 2018 with exercising power? And not just in, I said in my notes to you originally, just corporate America, but it's really not just corporate America. We are not as comfortable as I would think we should be with power in our lives, with power altogether. And so I thought maybe Beth, start with that, and then I'll have Jessica chime in. So
sure.
Why is that?
Yeah. So thank you, Leslie, and hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you. Really excited to see a lot of names up there that I know and that I don't know, and delighted to be presenting, I guess, with Jessica. So to the point of why, I mean, I think, this is as we all know, it's a multifaceted issue. There's cultural factors, institutional factors, there are individual factors. And so, obviously we're not going to get into all of that today. And, each piece of that has a different, quote, intervention, if you will, policy and, broader kinds of solutions, all the way down to the individual. And so what I'm focused on primarily in talking today is about, at an individual level, woman to woman, what are the kinds of things that we can do in our lives to gain more power? Having said that, in terms of the why and the where it comes from, clearly there are socialization factors, the way we're socialized to be differential and caretakers. There are biological elements that make us different, make women different than men, and there's a lot of debate about how much is biology versus socialization, but leave it at the fact that we are at a point where we grow up, both men and women, to expect women to behave differently. And then we get into organizations and systems where there are massive imbalances in power that have massive implications for, everything from individual women's self-esteem and relationships to, what we have seen happen with the Me Too movement, which is very much about power differentials and power being wielded in a gendered and sexual way. And it also has implications for the economy. And I'll just end that note with one thing I was reading as I was preparing for this. The McKinsey does a great set of research they call the Women Matter research. And I had never heard, I've heard a lot about the fact that boards are more effective when there are at least, 2 or 3 women on them, that management teams and businesses are, higher performing, something like 15% higher revenue in the Fortune 500 for those that have, more gender balance. But McKinsey has this very interesting statistic. They say, if women were to participate in the world of work identically to men, an additional 28 trillion or 26% of incremental global GDP could be achieved by 2025. So if that doesn't tell you what the opportunity is here for us to grab onto our power and to move into a more active role in the world, I don't know what does.
See, I always thought that it would be the money that would get these people who are holding onto the power and not letting us have it, get them to move away and let go, because everybody wants money, but not so much. So Jessica, what would you like to add to this, and from your perspective, which may be a little different?
So hi, first of all, thanks very much for having me on. And Beth, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this opportunity. Hopefully, the military insights will be relevant for the non-military crowd. So I shall try not to speak in acronyms. To the question of why, I think the big problem is we don't think deliberately about what power we have. So I teach leadership at West Point, and, we have a lesson on bases of power, and we talk about, the 5 bases of power that are out there. And, I go through an exercise with the students of like, what base of power do you have? And they almost always will focus on only the formal power. They will only focus on their rank or what they have or what they don't have. They don't think about information power and how they can get that and how they can use it. They don't think about, the experiences that they've had. They don't think about their ability to, be someone worthy of looking up to. So they don't think, the students don't think a lot about it. And I think we as women are so trained to be averse to power that we either deliberately avoid thinking about it, or we just aren't conditioned to thinking about it deliberately. We're uncomfortable with the idea of having it. And one of the things that you said, Leslie, if I may, to kind of zoom in on, you said, why won't the people in power let us have it? There's an argument to be made that you take the power that's there, right? You go into a situation knowing what power you have, as opposed to asking for permission to exercise it. I think that's a big shift in many ways if we start to think about situations and dynamics and interactions from that perspective of what do I have going in, and then thinking about how the interaction can go from there.
And what made you feel comfortable with power? You obviously didn't fall for all those female things, or did you? And how did you end up in the Army, which is not the normal, female unpowered thing?
Well, I mean, in the 90s, so I enlisted right out of high school just because I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I was always kind of a tomboy. So early on in my career, I was not focused on, I was very adamant that I was a soldier who happened to be female. I was going to be one of the guys. And as a young woman, and especially in a predominantly male environment, that's a strategy that works often, because you don't have to, but the script was you separate yourself from the other girls, and you focus on being part of the guys. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that, it hit me very clearly when I came back from Iraq, that I was not one of the guys. I had a very different problem set coming home, and I had to really figure out how I was going to deal with the challenges that I was facing, both at work and at home, without being able to appeal to like my guy friends. So I had to really kind of make some adjustments there. So I think part of it is when we were at one of the events a couple of weeks ago, and one of the speakers said, not knowing what you're supposed to be, like not acknowledging what others' expectations are for you if you don't know the rules, you can't play by the rules in many ways. So I think that that's one really key way that we can acknowledge what's going on, but then, you know, exert dominance over the situation in many ways by not playing by the rules that are set for us.
So is that one of the cases, do you think, is that women play too much by the rules? And is that why we don't take the power that we should have? Beth, do you want to?
Yeah, so I do think, yes, we play by the rules, we play by our scripts, our roles. I mean, this is a generalization, but more or less, we do tend to, I mean, this is, you know, what happens in human behavior, so it's not surprising. If we were thinking about everything consciously at every moment, we couldn't do anything else. So we are a little bit on automatic pilot. And when we move outside of social roles and expectations, it causes some anxiety or some discomfort. And so one of the things that I have done to sort of try to get my arms around how do we actually push outside of that discomfort is I created this framework. And Leslie, I know you asked me to, or us to kind of share things. So we're not screen sharing, but if you can see this, this sort of
Fabulous.
this sort of framework, and I'll speak to it as I talk, because this is the way I sort of think about the way of kind of, you know, creating your own space, and what I say, designing your personal power source. And so what this has right at the top is cultivating the right mindset. And this is where, as Jessica talks about being deliberate, it's all about being deliberate and aware. So cultivating the right mindset really involves examining what you even think power is. We've got a lot of judgments about power, I think, as women. There's a lot of associating power with men or with people who are different than us in some way. And so examining your definition, your beliefs, your feelings about it, and then reframing that as appropriate. So this is one of the things that Jessica and I have talked about. Power is neutral. Power is not bad in and of itself any more than having a vision is bad or having a goal is bad. That's a neutral thing. It can be good or bad depending on what you do with it, of course, right? And so power is about using resources to influence outcomes and get results. I mean, that's one way of thinking about it. And most of us want some kind of outcome and results, okay? So really looking at your beliefs and your feelings about it and coaching yourself a bit, getting other people to hold you accountable for reframing. The other thing that's a mindset piece in terms of this broad, you know, cultivating your mindset is this idea of self-efficacy. So self-efficacy, you know, many of you have probably heard that term or studied it in your college psychology class, but self-efficacy is very much about your beliefs that you are going to achieve what you set out to achieve. And we can be very nervous about outcomes, about our success potential, and that may require us kind of explicitly looking at that and again doing some self-coaching around that. The other sort of mindset issue is our locus of control. And what I tell people to do is play with your locus of control. One of the things that we know women do is they tend more than men to attribute, on average, to attribute bad things happening to them in the workplace as their fault. That's internal locus of control. And then they, by contrast, attribute good things that happen to them in the workplace and professionally as more about luck. That's an external locus of control. So if we can examine our locus of control and make sure that we are taking credit in our own mind for the assets, the value we bring, the strengths that we can leverage, and saying, yes, I do bring this to the table, then we're much more likely to be able to sort of extrapolate or imagine that we bring that through to fruition, through to success. And so those kinds of things are really important for us to examine. And then the other thing that is really important in terms of that cultivating the mindset is welcoming uncertainty and anxiety. So this has to do with our risk tolerance as one part of it. Men, by and large, tend to be a bit more risk tolerant than women. And this plays out in terms of our ability to gain power in a lot of ways. If we are risk intolerant, we tend to stick more with what we're good at, what we know we will be successful at, and we tend not to stretch as much and take risks that may end up, being failure experiences. Unfortunately, what happens is that keeps us somewhat stuck, or at least advancing much more slowly than men who are taking more risks and stretching. There are other implications in terms of our ability to learn, et cetera. And the last thing I'll say about the mindset piece is that anxiety I mentioned. So welcoming uncertainty and anxiety. Jess and I were talking about this earlier as well. One of the things that performance psychologists do is they help high-performing athletes and performers to reframe anxiety as sort of the adrenaline that allows them to be optimally successful. And it may take some time and some self-coaching, but if, as you experience physically a feeling of anxiety and discomfort with regard to risk and stretch and putting yourself out there, if you can reframe that as excitement and adrenaline and something that's going to allow you to really, put yourself forth and achieve, then over time, it will become more of a motivator than an inhibitor. So that's the cultivating the mindset piece.
That's great.
There's all sorts of other things.
Okay.
But we can talk about that.
Will you share that? You can share that that visual with us, and we can send it to everybody, and then everybody can have it to work on later. That's just terrific. Thank you. And so Jessica, I'll jump to you then for this one. Along those lines, what we found is that there's a confidence gap as well for women, and these are the numbers that I've seen 100,000 times. Women wait till they have 97% of the experience on their resume before they throw their hat in for a job. And there's the guy in the background who has 48%, and he's in. He's got it. He's got this, right? This is so typical. And then I was just talking, I went down to a group of investors, women who are investing in women's companies. And here are women who are investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in other women. And I started talking about how hard it is for me to ask for money for myself. I can ask for money for charities. I can ask for money. And I was just saying, I've got to get over this. I've got to raise money for Cubby Club. And this investor turns to me and she goes, I have the same problem. And I thought, wait a minute, if the women who are doing the investing are not even comfortable and have this confidence gap. And then when we got into the discussion, what was revealed is that when it comes to investing, for instance, women and men have the same amount of information about a company. The man feels he's in, he's got this, and a woman's like, I need a lot more info. Mm-hmm. So what about the confidence gap? Is that one of the things that holds us back? And then we'll jump to some questions after that.
Well, I think I think it's a really great question, right? Because how do you get confidence, right? Like it ties back to the opening question of like, how do you gain power, right? And I think it's really, it's this case of we have to cut ourselves some slack for starters. We have to give ourselves permission to, take a risk, right? And what I mean by that is like, don't just jump off a bridge blindly, right? But one of the things that I think has done me personally a lot of good over the years is what's the worst that could happen? Mm-hmm. When I was applying to grad school, I had no business applying to Duke and Harvard and Princeton, right? None whatsoever. My undergrad experience wasn't where it needed to be. And I said, you know what, I'll be out $50. What's the worst that could happen? And they'll say no. And I got one yes, right? And I honestly, like my GRE scores weren't where they needed to be. And I got my one yes. And so we have to stop cutting ourselves short because we don't meet all of the qualifications. And in many ways, it's not something that we can do by ourselves. We kind of need to get, those, our support group, our tribe, our cheering section to go, you know what, submit that doggone resume or submit that application, because you know what, you just might get it. Because if you don't, take that leap, you're not going to get it. The other thing is, one of the things that I've been working with one of my colleagues on, she gets very nervous about teaching. And this woman is brilliant. Like, she is the reason I passed stats in grad school. She's absolutely brilliant. And she's incredibly insecure. And I was like, why don't you get up in front of a class one day and do zero prep and just see how it goes? And she was like, oh my God, that's my worst nightmare ever. And the thing is, it's like, so put yourself in it. And I guarantee you, it won't go as bad as you think, because you know all of this. And then the other piece too is we have to be uncomfortable with, or be comfortable with, what we don't know, right? Like, to your point about, we like to know all of the information, or we like to have more information. Be okay with knowing you don't know all of that. So if I have a student that asks me a question that I don't know, I'm okay with, you know what, I'm not really sure about that. Let me go ahead and, does anybody else want to take a crack at it? And if not, we'll let's come back to it, because I'm not actually sure and I don't want to give you the wrong answer. Right? Being comfortable just in what you do know, but just as much in what you don't know, right? We don't have to know everything. And this idea that we put these unrealistic expectations on ourselves, that really help kind of hold us back. And it's like, just get more comfortable with not having all the information, and figure out what decisions can you make, what can you do, what can you react to in the situation that you do know, right? I'm not really sure about this, but I do know this, and how, can we move forward with that? And one final piece with the confidence thing, I think one of the areas that women struggle with tremendously is confrontation and conflict at work. And I think military conflicts at work are a little bit different.
Yeah, how is that?
Well, it sometimes can be prison rules where, you're doing the knife hand and you're yelling at folks. But most of the time, it's not going to resort to physical violence. And most of the time we have to make a decision of, is there a way to deflect this confrontation, or is this someone that's challenging your legitimacy and your right to even be in the position that you're in? And oftentimes I will see women back down when they are fully in their rights and in their position. They need to push back, right? Because if they don't, now they've ceded the battle space, so to speak, to whoever's challenging their authority. And so one of the ways that I've kind of worked with some peers over the years with is practice fighting with yourself. Like, if you think that if you've had a confrontation with someone at work, as you're riding home, like, imagine what they're saying, and imagine what you could say if you were like, just go off and like unleash fury, right? Knowing you're never going to do that in the real world, right? But just practicing that reaction, getting that mental rep of saying the words, of letting yourself be angry in practice, gives you an ability to kind of feel those emotions, and gives you the ability to try out the words and try out the response, so that when the actual conflict comes, and maybe it never will, you've actually kind of done some rehearsal on it a little bit, and you've war gamed it a little bit. And, you can, if you watch this person do something, if you have somebody that utterly, degrades and belittles somebody else at work, right? Come up with some strategies beforehand of how you want to tackle that if they attempt it with you. Humor is a great way to deflect. Not going head to head sometimes is a great way to kind of redirect the conversation and allow people to save pride. But sometimes the best answer is you need to go head to head, and that has consequences. Beth and I had talked about how, going head to head with folks does definitely have some negative consequences. But a lot of times people want us to stand up for ourselves, and they're disappointed when we don't.
See, and then we have the issue where they say we're a bitch if we stand up for ourselves, or we're too tough.
I have thoughts on that, but I want to see what Beth has first.
Oh, good. We've got a question here, which I want to throw into this. Heidi, do you want me to just read this, or would you like to give your question out? We've got a really great question. Heidi, oops, wait, hold on, can't hear you. Okay, oops, 1 second. 1 sec, unmute. No, there you go. Heidi, speak. Can we hear you? No, we can't hear you. Come closer. Is your computer on?
Yeah, and I unmuted.
There, now we can hear you. Speak close.
So I feel like it might help if I gave a little context. I've been a model for 15 years, and in a model agency situation, you're put in a very powerless position, even contractually speaking. Mm-hmm. And so it's something I've been trying to fight for in the industry across the board, is like us being able to have a voice, especially as we get older and are a little more knowledgeable about how things work.
Yeah.
But when I confront my agent, he has a very quick ability to shut me down and try to make me feel powerless. And I'm the expert. You don't know what you're talking about. So I get angry and emotional in that situation. And I didn't know if you had any advice on how to cope with that.
So if I might, first of all, more power to you for fighting for the broader, war to be won. So that's fantastic. There are a few things. Number one, I would say becoming emotional is probably the one of the two greatest ways that we allow our power to leak away, that we give away power. And I know it's hard, so I'm not saying, oh, just don't be emotional, but just as a placeholder, being emotional. So one of the things that I work, a lot on with women around power is them becoming more conscious of the triggers of their emotion, and what happens, that cascade of things. Do they get red faced? Do they lose their cool and composure, etc.? Because when those things happen, our credibility gets just undermined in a magnified way. And so the more that we can be prepared for those situations, the better, and manage our emotions. The other piece, I think, is something I'll get to in a minute, but this relates to a few things that Jessica talked about. One is exposure or at-bats. If anybody has ever studied panic and anxiety and treatments for those, exposure therapy is one of the most important things, behavioral things you can do. And that means exposing yourself, starting with little incidents and bigger, exposing yourself over time to things that make you anxious, that make you angry, that make you upset, that mess with your confidence, whatever the negative outcome is, and just continuing to do that. And so you get sort of inoculated against the impact. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing that she talked about is rehearsal or prep. And this is also really, really important. And I think in this case, it could be a good one, where you rehearse and you anticipate what your agent is going to say, what the arguments against you will be, etc. And that also enables you to kind of maintain your composure. The third piece is the importance of cultivating your network and being very strategic about the kinds of people you have in your network. There are several important things to think about. Certainly those for emotional support and feedback, for example. But there's also mentoring and sponsorship. But there are also promoters. Who is going to promote you with some of these tough, cookies that you're interacting with? And many of us have benefited from having promoters who are men, who help to kind of talk us up and support us with others. Now, obviously, in any given context, you may or may not be successful, and ultimately it's your choice, what you do with that. But those are just a few things that I would say. The kind of overarching way I think about things also is, first of all, clarify your purpose. If you are passionate about what you're trying to achieve, and you are strategic about that influence network, the support network I talked about, and you practice and rehearse and anticipate and expose yourself, those things begin to get you more effective over time with those difficult situations. And then, if it's not working out, then you have a choice.
Jean,
Yeah.
I'm gonna jump into Jean had a question. Do you wanna put your question out there, Jean? Or do you want me to do it? Is Jean here? Or it says Jean, maybe it's not Jean. Jean is saying money is power as well.
Yes, that's.
There you are. Okay, go ahead.
I had to figure out how to unmute. Yes.
Okay, sorry. I should have unmuted you. Okay.
That's okay. One of the things that I find is, and I agree, and thank you for the exposure over exposure over exposure, because I have found as I have gained more confidence as in my advancing years, it makes it easier. But money is the one thing that I find very difficult when I'm applying for a new position. And I know men have no problem dealing with that, but money is power. And we always end up getting paid less for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I don't feel comfortable with, I can discuss issues passionately and effectively, but I really am not comfortable discussing money and salaries.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna jump in here and say, you're gonna love we're gonna do one of these, and it's called How to Ask for Money Without Feeling Slimy. So we're gonna bring two experts at that. I can't do it either, I stink at it. So Jessica, do you have any ways of asking for money? This is a vexing problem for all of us.
This is not my area of expertise at all. I'm in the Army. I get
Okay,
salary,
she can go to the
so I
Okay.
have no idea. The only thing I know
That's
about that
hilarious.
is let someone else set the dollar amount first, and then you go up or down from there. Like the one thing I know about negotiations is the first person who speaks loses. So like
Yeah.
that's all I know about salary.
Yeah.
I've heard that. And New York State just came out with, do you guys know, at least New York, I don't know any other states that have, there may be more, where they're not allowed to ask you about your previous salary anymore, which is the thing that has been holding women back for so long. Because you start out behind the ace, behind, and then you continue behind because each salary builds on the last one.
Right.
So that's one of the ways that things are going to change, and it's going to be very difficult for all those HR people to figure out how to do this.
Right.
I'm gonna,
Leslie,
yes,
Leslie,
go ahead.
can I just add, I
Yes.
will say a bit about that because that comes up a lot with the
Good.
executive women that I coach. And there are a couple pieces that I heard, and I think they relate to some of what we've touched on previously. It makes you uncomfortable. It makes us uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable too. You know what? Too bad. We have to do it. So it's kind of like the comment Jessica made about, we can't wait for people to give us power. We can't wait for people to recognize us. We have to make the ask. So there's an element of taking the risk. It's extremely uncomfortable. I haven't done it before. I'm not quite sure how it's going to turn out, but I have to do it. And by the way, I will say, many men are not really terribly comfortable in these situations either, but there's a little more precedent. They've done it a little more, but just do it is the first thing. The second thing is draft it in writing. I tell everybody this, anytime you're going to have an uncomfortable, difficult conversation, draft it in writing first, talk about it with some trusted folks in your network, friend, spouse, partner, colleague, whatever, and practice it a little bit. Anticipate what they're going to come back with, what their pushback is, what their position is, and be ready to talk about your value. This is a sales pitch when you make an ask for money. So they're going to push back because that's their job. It's not personal. You've got to do this. Be ready to talk about your value. Prepare your pitch ahead of time, and then very confidently and decisively, but kindly say, I bring a lot of value in X, Y, and Z way. I'm going to really contribute to these outcomes for this organization's ABC. I know those are really important for this organization. Sounds like a great fit between me and it. I would love to contribute. Here's what I need to do that. This as well, or whatever it is. So plan it out and just do it, and you will get better at it over time.
Practice. All right. And I'll tell you, having hired many, many people, HR always makes you go in lower than you have in your pocket. And you probably all know that you're holding back, $3,000 to $5,000 of what you can do.
Right.
So that's a thing. Janice, so let me unmute you. You had a question?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I can't tell. Can you hear me through well, anyway, I have my phone and my computer. So I wanted to say how much I appreciated your comments about our power and how relevant it is to the workplace. But I was standing in line at the grocery store and I saw a headline. It was the woman who destroyed Matt Lauer. And I thought, she didn't destroy him. That was Matt Lauer who destroyed himself. And we're very powerful in our own right, you know, but we never get credit for it. And so I wondered if, what struck me as you were speaking is how much every single thing, the woman from West Point, when you were describing the, I forget which person you are, but the basis of power, how every single thing that you described also describes our personal lives. In the power of information and experience, and we always want to like sort of poo-poo that bit of power. And I wonder if there's a way, are there groups that are teaching that to young women and girls so that in 30 years they're still not trying to figure out how to reclaim their power? Because I sure lost mine along the way.
Well, if I may, the challenge with power really starts in middle school. We see that young girls, you know, as soon as there's something that happens when they hit middle school, either 5th or 6th grade, where, you know, part of it is puberty and all of a sudden they're trying to figure out how to do the dynamics there. But teachers also tend to reinforce some of our gender stereotypes and our gender roles. And so it starts very, very early. By the time they get to me as a junior or a senior in college, right? Like they've already had a lot of socialization that sets their you know, their norms and what they're comfortable with. And it takes a lot of pushing and talking and coaching to get young women to kind of be okay with being comfortable in those leadership positions, from simple things like when you're when, you know, we put young women up in front of the formation, and you know, I tell them, you know, don't talk in front of the formation with a high-pitched voice. You know, lower your voice because lower decibels carry better, right? I'm not telling you to talk like a man. I'm telling you to like talk so that you can be heard in the back of the formation, so your voice projects. And I think I mean, there does need to be deliberate coaching on this and more focused mentoring, but it also needs to start with coaching the men that are in young women's lives from a very early age, because we can do so much, but if the guys in our lives and the men that are you know, in the leadership positions are reinforcing, you know, you have, you know, RBF and, you know, you don't smile enough, then all of the work that we're doing is being undone. So it really is a twofold problem where we need to tackle, you know, our own behaviors, but we also need to tackle, you know, the men that are around these, you know, young women especially, and like stop teaching them these expectations. Be aware of the connotations of what you're saying, and help them mentor as well, because there are so few of us in the workplace that a lot of our mentoring does come from men. And so we have to use this opportunity to kind of teach them how to mentor, you know, our younger selves, so to speak.
Do you want to talk? Oh, go ahead. Somebody else, go ahead.
Oh, it's Janice. I was just going to say it's so hard because they're so, I mean, even I'm 55, we're so influenced by everything that we see, and, you know, it seems insurmountable. I sure hope that it isn't. Thank you so much for all the insights. I was taking notes furiously while you were speaking, so thank you.
I wonder, could I just say something?
Yes.
It's Suzanne here. I'm on the phone. I've struggled with this my entire life, but most recently, my partner has been very ill, and he hasn't been able to really deal with anything in the house, making decisions in the house or in our lives. So I've had to be the leader for the first time and making the decisions, and it felt really uncomfortable to me. And I've been trying to work out why. And I feel like a woman, I don't think I should be doing it. And I was trying to work out where it comes from, even though, you know, at work I've been very strong and I can be a leader. But and I think it's of women of a certain age, I'm in my 50s, is that, you know, we grew up in the 60s and 70s and our formative years. And so the world is right when a man is in charge. And there's something wrong with the world when I'm in charge. And also I feel like I don't want to be necessarily in charge. I want to be supported and to be looked after. So I know these are sort of, I think there's unconscious things going on that can sabotage us. And I've experienced it myself. It's like, yes, okay, I can run everything. And that just means I don't have to fight with my partner because we're not arguing, but I feel very exposed. I feel very vulnerable. I feel like, I didn't, yeah.
Right. Well, if I might just respond to that, Suzanne. I mean, first of all, it's terrible to hear about your partner's health and all the turmoil that has caused. I think there's a macro kind of historical lens to look at all of this through, and even to Janice's comments, we are in a long evolution of humans, and so the individual experiences we have are still going to be fraught for a long time. And over time, things will become more equal. Over time, things will become, more comfortable. But right now, we're in a disruptive phase. And so, the comment you made, Suzanne, is even, kind of at a more acute level where you're in a generation that has that historical, way of behaving, expectations of self, of gender relationships, and you're moving in and kind of being forced to stretch beyond where you're comfortable. So you're sort of like history, a little bit too intense happening right there in 1 year. But I think generally that kind of disruption is what enables us to move into more comfort with these things. So we get disrupted, it's uncomfortable. It's like lifting weights and getting sore. We get, it's uncomfortable. We don't feel great about it. It's not what we feel competent at. And over time, as we do more of it, we get better and more comfortable at it. Now, you may not choose ever to embrace it if you have a choice, but that process will happen because that's just a developmental process.
Yeah, and if I could just piggyback onto that just a little bit, one of the things that I'm constantly either reminding myself or reminding, the young leaders that I'm around is, if not you, who? Right. And unfortunately, you're in a situation where it has to be you, and you're not comfortable with that. And I'm terribly sorry that you're going through that, but it has to get done. And in many ways, when I challenge the young people around me, I ask them that, if not you, who? And when they look at it that way of like, it's my responsibility to step up, it's my responsibility to say something, then they tend to step into that role a little bit better. And with a little bit more confidence, because they recognize that this is what, it may not be how things should be, but it's how things are. And as soon as they accept how things are, they're able to better deal with kind of the uncertainty there.
Can I ask?
Good.
Go ahead.
No, I said that's good. I said that's good.
Are any of the younger women who are on here, do you see it as being still a challenge? Do you guys feel that you don't want to take control? Do you feel, I'd love to hear from, I think there is a generational difference in some ways. I mean, I see my children, my 20-year-olds are fierce. They scare me. They're so in charge. They scare me. How about anybody here? Yeah.
Hi, this is Chelsea.
Hey, Chelsea.
So Leslie's known me my entire life, but I certainly don't struggle with that. I'm in business. I've run a sales division for years. It's so funny you were talking about asking for money before, because I actually just rushed home from an interview for this, in which the hiring director asked me how much I would like to be paid, which was very uncomfortable, but I did it. But one of the things that I find very comforting about the control is the ownership of it. I've had a great life where a lot was provided to me, but I found that at some point I liked to have control over the things that were around me. And while, so funny because Leslie knows my father, but while my father was anxious to get his house back, I was more anxious to build my own home. And, to Suzanne, who's now having to run a household, I can't imagine having to do it when it's not your choice, because it certainly was my choice. But I live in Midtown Manhattan by myself, single free in over here. And one of the things that I find most empowering is that when I come home, doesn't matter how bad the day was or what happened around me, I know that it's mine. I made it, and anything that I'm upset about, or that argument I have with my boss or one of my employees, or that deal I just lost, it doesn't really surpass how satisfying I guess I can kind of come home and see what all of that effort and all of that heartbreak and that frustration, and makes it all worth it. So it's so uncomfortable to ask for money. It's so uncomfortable when you feel like you're discriminated against at the office or whatever, but something has to be that reminder of why it's worth it. For me, it's coming home and seeing that the home that I built. For some, it might be the family you've built. But you know, that kind of makes it all worth it. It gives me confidence. You know, when I leave my apartment in the morning, I know that I can do it because I've done it before and I'll do it again.
Great. Awesome. Kirsten, you had a question from before we got started. Do you want to ask your question live here?
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure I remember exactly what it was, and some of it.
I have it. I have it. Do you want me to? It was, you were
sure,
talking
if you want to read it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were talking about exercises you could do with clients to help them step into their power as social entrepreneurs. You said, my clients are often corporate executives and academics who've had a lot of success in their careers. Working with me, they're reinventing themselves into social entrepreneurs who are starting for-profit businesses, nonprofits, and foundations. But they're now out of their comfort zones, and I see them step back from their power because they're in new areas. So are there exercises that she can give them, ladies?
So I'll say a bit here. I mean, first of all, it sounds like you're already doing great things with them. And so, you know, for what it's worth, if this accelerates it or not, when I think about what to do about this, there's of course the mindset I mentioned, but then the next thing is clarify your purpose for power. And actually Chelsea was just reminding me of this in the way that she framed you know, things for herself. So what is your purpose? What do you need power to achieve? Or if you had a great deal of power, what could you actually do? And it strikes me that women moving into social entrepreneurship or other kinds of probably very meaningful endeavors would really benefit from, you know, just first of all, clarifying that and leveraging that connects to power. They need power to make that happen. Then it's a matter of, especially in a new context, understanding the system that they're entering and then being strategic. So what are the politics in their new system? And you know, who gets rewarded in this new system? And what are the rewards? What are the incentives? What's the currency in this new system? That's sort of understanding the system. Being strategic is about saying, okay, let me map stakeholders in this system and let me, you know, leverage that so that I can develop more influence in this system, and let me use exchange and reciprocity. What do people need from me? How can I make them successful or give them something and then get something from them in the system? So those are sort of the more kind of strategic systems level. Then there's the behaviors. And I think the number one, you know, thing that people get rewarded for is hard work. Then the second thing is knowledge and contributing to results. And that may be solving problems. It may be providing material support. So these are not mysteries, but they do require that you learn fast and you figure out how to contribute fast. But I think if you study the system initially, you know, hit the ground running by studying the system, understanding the organizational politics, and developing your stakeholder map, your constituents based on that purpose that you're trying to achieve, then you can kind of implement the behaviors.
Yeah, that's really helpful because, yeah, one of the things that I do with my clients in the beginning when we first start working together, and I should say, and as a side note, sometimes my clients actually have to reevaluate their power, because when they're used to, like you were saying, understand the system that you're moving into, that's definitely something my clients have to deal with, because a lot of them are used to dealing with power, their power in the corporate world.
Right.
And now, you know, they're entering a whole different world, and if they go in with the same like way they present their power, they're going to alienate a lot of people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, do you ladies, Jessica and Beth, do you have any books that we could read, because we're pulling into the end of the discussion. Are there any kind of, things we should read, or are there websites you go to? Do you guys offer coaching? Can we come to Jessica's class? Should we meet at her in West Point the next time?
If anyone wants to come, you're more than welcome. Just send me a note ahead of time and we'll figure out how to make it happen. But it'll have to be in the fall because the semester's over in 2 weeks.
Yeah, nice.
So what is your class, Jessica? What is it called that we could come to?
Well, I teach military leadership. So I teach, that's one of the classes. And I also teach social theory and inequality. So, lots of options there.
Cool. And Beth, do you have any readings that you think we should do?
So can you see this? Okay, so this is one book recently came out. Jessica was at an event we had with Sally Helgeson, just wrote this book, How Women Rise, with Marshall Goldsmith. And some of you may have read some of Marshall Goldsmith's books in the past, which were kind of coming from his experience coaching primarily men. He wrote a lot about the concept of what got you here won't get you there. Well, he and Sally have now kind of come together to give that a lens that's more appropriate for women's experience. Sally, back in, I don't know, probably 1989 or so, wrote a book called The Female Advantage, which really sort of foreshadowed a lot of what is considered good leadership competencies today. So that's one thing. The other thing is, some of these articles and blogs in Fortune and Forbes can be quite good. I find Harvard Business Review to have a lot of really interesting stuff on women that's not too academic or too tough. I'm gonna be a little bit of a geek here. This is actually a printout of the Fortune 100 most powerful women from 2017. And I tell you what, reading about and watching videos by women who are in positions of power is not only inspiring, but it's really, it sort of holds you accountable to get off your duff, start doing things, take risks, be courageous, work hard. So, look, Mary Barra at GM oversaw this enormous recall, $29 million worth, I think. Indra Nooyi at PepsiCo, amazing woman. Marilyn Hanson is the CEO of Lockheed Martin, I think it is. Abigail Johnson at Fidelity. So in other words, there are many, many women out there that we can look to and learn from, and that can give you very practical ideas on stuff to do. I would also say, I have all sorts of Harvard Business Review articles and whatnot, but I would say just Googling some of that for Harvard and just begin to read it. One of the things real quick, way back when I got my start in my career as a psychologist, I was in behavioral medicine or health psychology. And when I did health coaching with folks, I would say, make sure to think about what you can do with regard to your identity as, a fit person or as a healthy person. And in this case, I would say the same thing. What can you do to cultivate an identity as a powerful woman? And one of the things with regard to the health coaching, I would say is, you're starting your walking routine or your running routine, subscribe to Walking Magazine or Runner's World. Have things around you that are symbolic of your new identity. And so reading articles, having things by these women, reading their biographies, watching videos and interviews with them, going to the Most Powerful Women Summit, exposing yourself to these people, I think is absolutely hugely powerful, and I would highly recommend it.
And I'm going to give Jessica the last word here because we're pulling into the end. We're 1 minute over and everybody will have to go. Jessica, last closing thoughts on what we can do, where we should go, what we should read, look at.
So I don't actually have a lot of female focused references in many ways, obviously, because I'm still very much surrounded in my daily life. But one of the things, one of the books that really struck me over the last couple of years was Sebastian Junger's book called Tribe. And he talks about how one of the things that leaders do is they share risk. And not only do they share risk, but they are the first to share the risk. But that risk is done not to benefit self, but to benefit the protection of the group. And that is something that women are actually, we tend to be more group focused. We tend to be more, collaborative and focused on relationships. So if we're willing to assume risk, to protect our people, to, stand up for, a better salary for someone else, why can't we do that for ourselves? And we should really start looking at, if not me, who? And how do I start taking better care of myself? Because I wouldn't let someone else treat me the way that I'm treating me. And then the last thing I'll say is I never really understood representation. So to tie back to what Beth was saying, I never really got this argument about representation, like why aren't there more powerful women in movies, et cetera, et cetera. And last year and this is going to sound cheesy, but when Wonder Woman came out, and, I got to see, I got to see a young woman who was, aching to go protect the vulnerable, and she was going to do the right thing. And she was, she was strong, and she was fierce, and she was effective, and she was also fully feminine. For me, that representation really struck home. And so I think it's really a case of find someone that find that person that you look up to, that you want to try to emulate, to be that example of someone that you want to, kind of shape and mold your behaviors and look at what they do. What are they successful at? What are they not at? It may be a woman, it may not be, and that's okay.
Right.
But it's really shaping that your behavior to kind of help you become the person that you feel like you want to be.
Awesome, ladies. Thank you. And you guys are completely amazing. Jessica, be prepared when all 20 people on the call show up at your class. You may be in deeper than you thought you were.
Anytime.
And I want to thank every single one of you for coming. And I want to thank you all for joining Covey Club and being here and being part of this conversation. I think we have a couple of other ideas that come out of this discussion. You guys, Beth and Jessica, you are amazing and totally, absolutely concrete. Thank you for that. And thank you for everybody for participating and bringing your questions. If you have more questions that you want to ask of Jessica or Beth, how can they reach you? And Jessica, how can they reach you?
Well, I'm happy to provide my email address. Should I do that now, Leslie, or do you want to send it out?
We'll send it out. We'll
Okay.
send it out. Marissa will send a follow-up. I also have a little survey. I'd love it if you take 5 minutes to take. Jessica, same thing. Should we send out your email?
Yeah.
Okay, and then your classroom too, right?
Right.
Like I said, we can't just show up. Like West Point gets salty about that. So we have coordination first, but we can make it.
So thank you all for being here. I'm so glad to see you all again. And I will see you on the next one. We watch the Covey Club pages for what's coming next. And I think, Marissa, the next one we have is May 11th. And it's how to have a great midlife relationship, which I have these two fabulous psychologists who I met in the green room of the Today Show. Dr. Ish is just a wonderful guy. He knows the male psyche really well, and he's really funny and really warm. And then Terry Orbach, who is fantastic. So bring your questions for how the heck do you get through this? I'm pulling up on a 30-year marriage. I never thought I'd make it. So it's different. It's really different, and it's hard to get there. And there are lots of tips and tricks. So thank you all, and have a wonderful weekend, and get back in touch with us if you have any questions. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thanks, Leslie.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Bye.